Halfway through talking about silver jackets and bulldog clips.
Bull clips, like the things you do with the big files. The bulldog clip, they had to clip me into the silver jacket because it didn't fit me.
Listeners, you join us halfway through a revealing conversation. Jess Phillips, Nick Bowles, welcome both back to the podcast. It's very good to have you back. They're alluding to something that isn't at the centre of the news this week, but which got Nick into a bit of trouble, I think, because he tweeted his approval of you in that outfit.
I said she was irresistible.
And you got into some trouble.
And that I would walk over hot coals for her.
I mean, my husband's never said that to me, I have to say.
And I got into trouble because everybody thought I was being sleazy. Creepy, I think, is what I was accused, which, of course, is slightly bizarre because I am gay. So while I was creeping out over Jess, my husband was sitting at home.
He must have thought, this is so odd.
I know. He's very broad-minded.
I mean, yeah.
A suitably bizarre way to start our look at our bizarre politics, perhaps. Bad segue.
So bizarre.
Where do you think we are as we sit here Thursday afternoon, hurtling towards another set of votes? Nick, you're responsible for some of these, and Jess looks too anguished to throw the first question at her. Where do you think we're going to be by the end of this week?
Well, I think weirdly, because it's certainly no fun for any of us, and it is pretty unedifying for any of your listeners and any other members of the public that we represent. But actually, I think weirdly we will have made some progress by the end of this week, because we will have done two incredibly important things, which is that we will have established as a firm position, in fact this is already established, of the government, that we are not leaving with no deal on the 29th of March. And frankly, until yesterday, that was the default position, and it was only because Parliament demanded this chance to have this vote and forced the Prime Minister to concede the votes yesterday, and then secondly voted in the way that it did, that we were able to absolutely guarantee that the government will now do what is necessary, which is to request an extension, and if the EU agree to that extension, and they've indicated very strongly that they are inclined to agree to an extension request, that then we will not leave on the 29th of March without a deal, and we will have a few more months, we don't yet know exactly how long, but probably 3, in which to find a compromise that we can back. Now, none of that was true even 3 days ago. So though it's been messy, and it would have been much better if the government had, talked to us all in a calm way and then brought this forward as a proposal. Nevertheless, we have made some progress.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like... I mean, yesterday didn't feel like progress at all when this sort of argy-bargy over who was whipping for what thing about no deal. It felt like just a terrible indictment of our current politics. But today, I have to say, in the sort of cold light of day, and seeing the amendments that will be put down today in regards to the extension and then indicative voting, which I believe last time we were on, we both said this should be happening months ago, this indicative voting. It does today, I feel less anxious than I did yesterday. Yesterday felt reckless. It felt like gambling with the national interest, and today it feels like potentially there is a chink. It is only a chink of light that we can walk towards together.
So
Gary said on the way in that it may not be the New Jerusalem, but it is at least Swindon.
The no deal, though, is no deal truly off the table? All the Whitehall officials who were working on it yesterday are working on it today. All the people in Brussels who are working on it are still working on it. The government is insisting. Theresa May barked it out in the House of Commons this week.
Well, I think it's very important.
It is still there.
No, it's very important. What was on the table, and not just on the table, but was the government's policy, was that we were going to leave on the 29th of March with no deal, unless Parliament backed the deal that the Prime Minister has done, the withdrawal agreement, which Parliament obviously signally failed to do this week. That was the policy. It is no longer the policy to leave on the 29th of March with no deal. Now, of course, at the end of an extension period, if still we haven't done a deal, then unless Parliament's then willing to revoke the whole thing, which I don't believe it would ever do, it's certainly not something that more than a very few MPs are suggesting, then of course, back will come this spectre of a no-deal Brexit. But what is crucial is that we bought ourselves some time. And time is what we need, as Jess was saying, when the government until now has stubbornly refused to allow us to debate or vote on anything else. We only ever have been given an opportunity to vote on her deal, not on any of the other deals.
My way or the highway.
Exactly.
It's essentially what we've been voting on, and nobody's that keen on her way.
And she's Theresa May is going to come back next week and say, my way, the highway on this occasion being a very long extension. She's going to say is exactly what we thought Ollie Robbins was overheard saying in that Brussels bar last month. She's going to lay that out, and she might get there. She's trying to outfox you. She's trying to make sure that she gets to the finishing line before you've got a chance to have your indicative voting, and she's in with a chance, isn't she?
She's in with a chance. She lost the first time of asking by 230, the largest defeat that any government has ever suffered on anything, I think. She then lost last week by 149, and that's having, pulled back significant Brexiter figures like David Davis and Nadine Dorries and Philip Davis. So she's got a lot of work to do. Now, ultimately, this is one of the few areas where Jess and I differ, which is that I don't mind her succeeding next week because I want us to move on, and I think most of the questions anyway that matter are in the next negotiation about the future relationship, and I'd just like us to be able to get back to talking about schools and roads and the economy. But you're right that is her strategy, is in a sense to use the threat not just of a delay, but also of the European elections. She's going to threaten us with that and then say to my colleagues, particularly my Brexiteer colleagues, unless you vote for my deal for the third time, then this is what's coming at you. It might work. It's quite a big leap that she's got to get through on one day.
She's not got to do a huge amount of face-saving on the part of her Brexiteers, and that is what or on the part of Labour MPs, actually, and that is where she uniquely fails Theresa May, in that she has throughout gone for threats rather than flattery, and flattery, you catch many more flies with honey than with vinegar.
And is it not right, Jess, that actually this week, on the meaningful vote, I think only 3 Labour MPs voted for it, which I think was a lower number.
It was lower this time
than on the first time. And I think next week you're not going to get many more Labour MPs because, as Jess says, she's certainly not wooing them.
No, not at all.
Here's another scenario. A lot of people did actually want to climb down, but they didn't do the choreography that well. The newspapers landed well. Certain other bits of the project landed quite well, but Geoffrey Cox's, the Attorney General's opinion did not land well. But there were people willing and keen to come down the ladder, including the DUP, is the argument. Conversations are going on at the moment to try and make that possible. It could all come together. Some, even ERG hardliners I've spoken to today, are saying they might be ready to do it if she promises to go after the short extension. Both your dreams, in a sense, I know, Nick Bowles, you say that you want this deal to pass and all the rest of it, but you're looking a bit sort of mournful. Both your dreams could be dying.
Well, none of this is any of our dream.
No,
I don't think.
really,
You have very limited dreams.
Both your optimal scenarios in a difficult world.
Of course, both of our optimal scenarios in a difficult world will not be realised by that. But to be honest, I mean, we're both pragmatists in this. And if Theresa May gets her deal across the line, which at the moment I don't see how she can, because there's all this chat in between each vote, and then the Attorney General will come and put a very, very big shot across her bows.
Wonder what you were going to say then.
I mean, people say that I'm smutty. He's been terrible, that bloody Geoffrey Cox, hasn't he?
I know. And with that voice.
I mean,
so
just ridiculous. Sometimes when he talks about Northern Ireland in the Chamber, I think he's probably trying to get so that they can actually hear him. He's so loud. But it's not my optimal position that she gets her deal through, and it's not something that I will vote for. But if this isn't about me getting what I want. We all have to compromise somewhere, and I think that there is zealotry that has gone on in the House of Commons, and actually I think that Theresa May fell for too much of that zealotry along the way, and so if I don't get what I want out of it, I will make the best of whatever I get.
You're always very honest, Jess. Will a tiny bit of you, even as a supporter of the second referendum, after all these months and years, will a tiny bit of you squeal a little bit of pleasure if it goes through?
I wouldn't squeal pleasure, but I have to say my shoulders would drop for a moment.
Relief. A bit of relief.
Yeah, because actually this isn't what my constituents want to talk about. It isn't particularly what I want to spend the rest of my political career. And Europe, never being a particular hobby horse of mine, will basically dominate the entire time I am in politics. And that wasn't always the case for the Labour Party. No. It certainly has often been the case.
Even for me, we had what now seemed to be a blissful 5 years in which we didn't really talk about Europe much. David Cameron had managed to lock it in the cupboard, but unfortunately it broke the door open and knocked him over with it.
Yes, I think he might have been operating the key, actually.
Yes, that I think is right. And I just from my perspective on that, I've always been very plain that the Norway-style deal, the Common Market 2.0 that I've been arguing for, has always been for me a plan B. I've always felt we needed a plan B because I thought that her plan A looked pretty unlikely to get through. So if by some miracle or skullduggery or arm twisting or blackmail or I don't care what means she gets it through, then frankly I will be deeply relieved. I will then make the argument that when the next phase of the negotiation starts, which is about the future relationship, it's actually about the stuff that matters, I will then just carry on making the argument that instead of her very bizarre hybrid, we should actually go into a Common Market 2.0 relationship. So in a sense, do
you feel the Tory grassroots are with you on that?
Actually, funnily enough, I wouldn't claim that the Tory grassroots are with me on everything. They're certainly not with me on stopping a no-deal Brexit. But when in my association, and I've had regular meetings with party members who are a bit cross with me at the moment, when I've presented to them the Common Market 2.0 plan, which involves staying in the single market but leaving all of the political side of the European Union, actually they've been very open-minded to it. And the reason why is because the one thing that all of us have heard dozens of times is people say on the doorstep, I was in favour of that common market, I just don't like all the political crap. And so it responds to what people have felt about the EU, which is that they could understand it 10, 20 years ago, but then it went off in a direction that they don't like.
Let's do one quick one more on that before we move on, though, because one of the things that's being said in the House of Commons as we speak now, on Thursday afternoon, by David Lidington, acting, whatever Deputy Prime Minister sometimes called, is that if we go down your route, indicative voting, and even as you might call it, off-the-shelf solution, that means a long extension.
That's not true.
He's emphatic. And he's
emphatically wrong on that. And the funny thing is he knows it too. He's right about any alternative bespoke solution. He's also right about a process of having a second referendum. Those would require long extensions. We had the first meeting this week of what we're calling the Future Relationship Working Group, which has Sir Alan Dashwood, the leading EU QC, EU law silk, George Perrotts QC, the leading silk specialist on EFTA, the European Free Trade Association, and a couple of other senior lawyers. And we went through in terms the requirements for negotiating a political declaration that points at a Common Market 2.0. And it's absolutely clear that securing complete agreement on a political declaration, which, remember, is not a legal treaty, it's just a political statement agreed by the EU and the UK, that would take a few weeks, and we would then have another couple of months to implement the legislation. Now, what's key about this is there is no other alternative compromise Brexit that can be done so quickly. This one can be done quickly for the very simple reason, not because we're somehow particularly brilliant. It's simply that we would be buying into existing structures that already exist, and where the EU has already said it'd be delighted for us to join. So we wouldn't be trying to make it all up, as a bespoke deal for us.
So your dream might live, and Jess, the dream of a second referendum. Do you feel that since other options fell off the table, Jeremy Corbyn has really thrown himself behind this?
No, I wouldn't say he's really thrown himself behind it, and I really wish that the Labour Party would pick a lane and inspire people to drive in it with them. I really wish that many people had actually been more inspiring throughout this process. But no, I don't. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is still very much torn. Keir, on the contrary, is much clearer. Like when he was asked by Ben Bradshaw yesterday, whilst he was at the dispatch box, will the Labour Party be backing a second referendum? Keir was yes. It was emphatic and clear. So I do wish that there was less triangulation. Actually, I think that the public are bored of triangulation and being babied. I think that we should just make the case, because as I frequently say, this is not a case that people are widely talking about the different options. This is very, very Westminster centric.
It could all come back, presumably, in a long extention
Yes.
as a major issue. Is that one of
Yeah.
your sort of? I mean, dream scenario doesn't feel the right word looking at you,
No.
at your face, but.
It's been one long nightmare, hasn't it?
Is that one of the best hopes for a second referendum?
Yes, a longer extension, which comes with it all the questions over whether we'd have to stand in the European elections, which nobody particularly relishes, although I think for the first time ever people might actually vote in the European elections,
Yeah, that's true.
more so than they ever did before.
Mainly for UKIP, though.
Well, potentially, and that is, it would be glib of me to pretend that wasn't a concern, but if we're not going to get a reasonable compromise deal through, and the zealots are going to continue to push against Theresa May on her own side, and then I'm willing to wear a long extension and have the democratic process. It won't be easy, but to be honest, no democratic process is ever particularly easy for those of us sort of deeply involved in it. And I think that it would be okay to have a long extension. But 21 months is what always gets talked about, isn't it?
Since we last spoke together, the three of us, there's been a new sort of embryonic party popped up.
That's all changed.
Not far from where you sit,
Yeah,
Jess, on the
indeed.
benches. What's your prognosis for them? And I mean, there have been a pretty busy few weeks in British politics since you last sat here. Do you think the two main parties, I'm going to ask you each individually where your own party is going on, but generally, do you think their futures are absolutely certain or precarious? Jess?
I think they're precarious. The new party's position is precarious, but then everybody's position is precarious. Dominic Grieve stood up yesterday and said we live in unwhippable times where the fracture of our parties is greater than it has ever been. I think, if anything, I think that there will be some semblance of a realignment of politics. I was just outside actually talking to some of the Remain campaigners and some of the UKIP blokes all there with their flags, and one thing that they all agreed on was a different sort of voting system. I was like, oh look, let's talk about that because you agree on that. Let's chat about the things we both like.
You should be in the United Nations.
or the Lib Dems.
Yeah, that was their thing, wasn't it? But I think that there will potentially be a real hardening of some parts of both political parties and a sense of a realignment of politics. And the Tiggers...
As in a new force in the middle that's
maybe
different.
just a sort of return to sensibleness of both the parties. I don't know.
Do you think that, Nick, or does it look like actually the journey isn't finished for the two parties? The journeys they've both sort of started, in a sense. The Tories becoming, some people would say, the Brexit party, Labour on a journey with Jeremy Corbyn. You know, those got further to run still, maybe a generation or so.
I mean, maybe, but we can affect these outcomes, and this is not all inevitable physics. It's a product of people's actions. And what I find myself rather conflicted about TIG, the independent group, because there is part of me that envies them.
They look much more relaxed.
They do look really happy.
They don't have to
themselves.
turn up at association meetings like you do to get pilloried.
That will come in time, but perhaps they don't have that now.
They don't get whipped.
But funnily enough, I also feel that I don't feel any strong instinct to think about joining them for a number of reasons. But I do think that their impact on both parties has been incredibly positive already.
I agree.
And that might be how history judges them.
And that might be how history judges them. The developments with which I personally have more sympathy, and I think Jess elsewhere has said that this may be true for her too, is so I'm actually very interested by what Tom Watson, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, is trying to do in setting up a caucus of social democrats, I think he's called it, or whatever, inside the Labour Party.
There was a meeting.
I would have gone, but I didn't go because I was at a meeting at my son's school in Birmingham.
Well, you might go to the next one.
I would have gone had I been in London, but I wasn't.
And I think that something similar will happen within the Conservative Party. I think that we've in a sense already been, over the last few weeks, been organising ourselves on the moderate wing of the party, the One Nation wing of the party. We've been organising ourselves much more actively than we've ever done before.
How many WhatsApp groups do you have on your phone?
God, way too.
I saw someone who's like-minded. I think it was who kindly showed me their phone the other day, and you were organising a few of them, but there are an awful lot of them.
Oh gosh, so many WhatsApps.
And I think that what we will want to explore is whether we can't continue to be more organised. As the debate moves on from Brexit and back into questions of housing policy or budgets or other priorities for the government. And we live in a world, as Dominic Grieve has said, which is much less whippable, and that's simply a product of the fact that there's no party with a majority. And in that world, especially within the governing party, a very small number of MPs can make themselves very influential indeed. I mean, you only need to look to the DUP to see how much influence you can have on a government if you are willing to stand up for what you believe in. And that, to me, I think may not be the kind of realignment that you're looking for, but it would actually achieve the realignment within Labour and within the Conservatives.
Let's put this in concrete terms. Pulling the parties closer to what used to be considered the centre ground of politics is what you're both kind of talking about. You're probably not comfortable with the phrase because it got a bad press for a while.
I'm not a centrist or a moderate. I like to think of myself. I'm a radical and I am left wing, but I don't even like to say but after that. I feel that there's no need for a qualifier. But yes, there is. I think basically both parties. It isn't even necessarily policy on the things, not Brexit. Put Brexit to one side where there is definite policy fractions, but within each party, most alignment on certain policies with some tinkering about the details is still people are relatively united on those things. It is the atmosphere actually that has to change. It is the atmosphere and the way that it has become so completely and utterly disrespectful of opinion. It's both sides have basically gone to the mattresses and tried to put thumb screws on by zealots, and that's what it's not necessarily policy centrism.
I think that's so right. I think this is, for me, a true realignment of British politics would be a recognition that the best way to make decisions and to do things is to work together with other people from other parties with other perspectives, not to try and ram through what your narrow ideological sect prefers. And Jess and I, if we put our minds to it, would find a million things we disagreed about.
Yeah.
But the truth is, we also could work together. I could work together with the members of the independent group. I'm currently working together with Jesse's colleagues, Stephen Kinnock and Lucy Powell. I'm working together with Yvette Cooper, and I'm working together with Norman Lamb from the Liberal Democrats. And that is the realignment. It's not about party labels. It's not about left or right. It's about, are you trying to do things in a sort of inclusive way that's trying to find common ground and create and build coalitions, or are you trying to do it in a sort of winner-takes-all divisive approach?
We could be in the age of zealots, though. These things come along.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely true. I think we are in the age.
But we're
of
the
zealots.
response to them.
Yeah.
They're not going to go away.
But
The question is, do we just sit there and allow ourselves to be steamrolled by zealots,
But
or
if you
do
were-
we stand up to them?
No.
But if you were predicting, say, the Tory leadership contest to succeed Theresa May, you'd have to say Boris Johnson is still a candidate.
Well, I think he's a busted flush myself, but I mean, what do I know?
There seem to be an awful lot of Tory MPs who don't want to get the wrong side of whoever might be the winners, and an awful lot of people who've said over the years that they've said exactly what you said, Jess, but who might just do what they once said was unthinkable and back him and get him into the final two for the membership. I mean, you could see Boris tacking towards a Brexit party sort of identity for the Conservative Party, couldn't you? If he were to be the successor, or whoever is the successor might tack that way in order to win.
They might try, but they would have the same MPs as Theresa May's got. And unless they're going to call an early election, which I can promise you is a guaranteed way to lose that leadership election, because there is no desire in the Conservative Parliamentary Party for an early election, they have to govern through and with the MPs that they have got. And we are in the process of demonstrating. We had a very significant vote in what time is so hard to keep track of at the moment, but a couple of weeks ago, where we effectively repeated what the Prime Minister had said at the dispatch box about giving us votes on no deal, and put it into an amendment that Yvette Cooper moved. And that amendment passed by over 500 votes to 20. The 20 were the hardline members of the ERG. Then there were about 60 abstentions, who were the slightly less hardline members of the ERG. So there were about 80 people who didn't vote for the motion. And the other 500 MPs all voted for that motion, that we should have a vote on no deal and a vote on an extension. Now, it was a very significant moment, because what it revealed for the first time was that the hardline Brexiters, they're an important group, and we must take their views into account, but they are a tiny minority of the parliament that was elected a year after the referendum, and the parliament that has 3 more years to run, and whoever is the next Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party will have to govern through that parliament.
We've just been looking at the Tory party for a bit. I mean, does Jeremy Corbyn, he's had a few sort of moments recently where it seemed like forces close to him, like John McDonnell, were pushing in a different direction, and I just wondered whether you feel he'll be there at the end of the year in the same job.
I think he probably will.
Year after?
Yeah, I mean...
right up to the next election.
It's very, very difficult to say, because I don't think I wouldn't say he was enjoying it in the way that he once did. And the difficult decisions, heavy is the head that wears the crown. I actually think that having to face difficult decisions and not just be able to either just be against things and or act with what your sort of lofty principles is not a jacket that suits him quite as well. And I think he probably is a little bit more uncomfortable in that jacket now. So, but what I would say on that is that I think that if Jeremy Corbyn goes, it will be Jeremy Corbyn's choice.
Not John McDonnell's.
Oh, well, I mean, I could
Then
speculate
McCluskey's.
wildly about the sort of soap opera that goes on behind the doors of Lotto between him and John McDonnell, but I have literally no insight, so I can't answer.
Can I try you on another one, which is, what is the dream scenario for Jeremy Corbyn as we approach perhaps the end game of Brexit, or just the end of the first act? There might be a few people leaving at the interval.
Going for dinner.
Is it to actually let 30, 40 Labour MPs slip the leash and do the dirty work for him and help this over the line next week, Theresa May's deal, and then he can hold up clean hands and say nothing to do with me and move on to another agenda? Or does that risk for him the Tory party getting over its Brexit angst and coming together again? Where's the balance of risk there?
I think that is a big risk. I think that if, again, I have no insight into the way that Jeremy Corbyn thinks about these things, but I think that actually your first option is the one that I think he thinks will give him the least flack in the future. But again,
get it over the line.
Get it over the line. I imagine he probably, and I don't necessarily criticise him for this. He probably wants it over and done with just as much as anybody else, because it's singularly sort of defining his premiership at the moment. Is the sort of people's vote argument. So I should imagine that's probably what he wants. But they will be working, I have absolutely no doubt. If I know one thing about the team that sits around Jeremy Corbyn, is they will be working out how to manage the flack after that within the party.
We've talked about this before, Nick, but the idea that underpins the approach that underpins Common Market 2.0, where some backbenchers, opposition parties come together and dictate the terms of Brexit to a government that doesn't want to implement them, it can sometimes seem so inherently unstable that it's just not viable. Somehow that just bursts apart and we end up with a general election or something else.
So if that were, in a sense, the only strategy, or if the strategy ended there, then I think I'd agree with you. I think if we, let's say, by some miracle, we managed to pull off a very narrow majority for a Common Market 2.0 proposition, which was, 280 opposition party votes, Labour votes, SNP votes, Plaid Cymru votes, Lib Dem votes, TIG votes perhaps even, and then 40 or 50 or 60 Conservative votes, that would be inherently unstable. But I think that that's not the end of the story, because look at the 200, well, it was 200, and then last week I think it was 230 Conservative MPs who voted for...
She'd have killed for 210.
The Conservative MPs who voted for the Prime Minister's deal, and in particular the Conservative MPs who voted for the Prime Minister's deal the first time round, which I think was 197 or something like that. Look at them. Most of them would be perfectly happy with a Common Market 2.0 solution if the Prime Minister's solution had been taken off the table. And then suddenly, if they were released, in a sense, because, let's say, meaningful vote number 3 or 4 or 5 has gone down again, and the Prime Minister has finally admitted she's not going to be able to frighten us into backing it, then conceivably you could have 200 Conservative MPs and 200 Labour MPs backing Common Market 2.0. That then is a stable Brexit, because that is then a majority that you can pass legislation.
Government shorn of Liam Fox, shorn of Chris Grayling. Imagine.
I think that both of those things would be a massive benefit for the government. Chris Grayling, they
but it
should
would be Theresa
shorn.
May saying goodbye to her whole mission to...
You have to admit, though, Jess, the gaiety of the nation would be vastly reduced.
That's true. He does
The cartoonists would be go on strike like the taxi drivers are constantly doing.
Well, it is a stretch to imagine Theresa May leading a government where she shoves the Brexiteers out the door or watches them leave and carries on regardless. It's a stretch.
It's a stretch, but frankly, literally everything that happens is a stretch until it happens.
Everything is a stretch at the moment. Yeah. There is no easy solution for any one of the campaigns, and that is why we need to go through a proper process of not just votes, actually, in that weird chamber of actual discussion. So what Jeremy Corbyn stood up and said yesterday, we're going to start a sort of discussion thing, which, is easy to laugh at the idea of him being a consensus builder, and I'm not sure that he is the person to lead a consensus in Parliament, but actually there does need to be certain characters across the board being willing to do that.
And you can imagine, if Theresa May asked David Lidington,
he has been a consensus builder throughout.
And
he talks to everyone.
And if Jeremy Corbyn asked Keir Starmer or Tom Watson or some combination to actually represent them in a process of sitting down and working through what compromise propositions might actually have a chance of being acceptable to both front benches. I actually think we'd take a month and we'd have something and we'd all vote for it with an absolute sigh of relief.
Quick last question to both of you, the same question. This time next week, Theresa May will be on her way to Brussels. Will she be going with a victory in her back pocket, meaningful vote 3 or not? Jess?
No, she won't have a victory by next week. I wouldn't have said no. But then I put a bet on, not in an official capacity, just a wager with somebody that she wouldn't be the Prime Minister by today. So what do I know?
But we'd be looking at a long extension.
Yeah, I would say.
Nick?
I think she probably won't win the vote next week, but I think she might only lose it by 50 or 60. And so then she'll be thinking, meaning vote 4, that's sounding very nice to me, week after the council, come back, on the 25th of March and say, listen, unless you vote for it today, then I'm going to pass the legislation for a long extension. If you vote for it today, I'll pass legislation for a short extension, will be out by the end of June.
Fourth time lucky.
Yeah, it's a meaningful vote, Tokyo Drift, I'm going to call it, which was the fourth of the Fast and the Furious films, and the best one.
With that searing insight into what you should be watching this weekend, thank you both for coming back and joining us again. Let's do it again.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed.
Please, it's always the most fun thing.
It is, yeah. It's nice.